You don't deserve a cent, not even the dirt she's buried under. That's what my father told me at my mother's funeral in front of everyone. 6 seconds, 6 words, and my world stopped breathing. He didn't whisper. He didn't hide it. He said it loud enough for the church walls to remember. And when I looked at him, at the man who raised me, he didn't flinch. No grief, no guilt, just ice behind his eyes. He stood next to my brother, the golden sun in a tailored navy suit. As if I were a stain they forgot to scrub out of the family photo. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I walked out of that church in silence. And when I came back, I didn't return for forgiveness, I came back for the deed. Because while they mourned a woman they never truly honored, I held the one thing they all feared most, proof that everything he built was never really his to begin with. My name is Natalie Grace Harrison, and I wasn't supposed to be there the day my mother was buried. At least, not according to my father. The invitation list was tight, curated, controlled, just like everything else he ever touched. But I showed up anyway, dressed in black, no makeup, hair tied back like a girl mourning quietly at the back of a storm. When I entered St. Matthew's Chapel in Savannah, every head turned, not in welcome, in warning, because I was the one they erased. My mother died a quiet death. No obituary under my name. No mention of a daughter in the service flyer. Just Charles Harrison, his beloved wife, Mary Ann, and their son, Blake. That's it, except I exist, and I remember everything. The day my mother died, I wasn't at her side. I was in a courtroom hallway, filing a motion to challenge the Harrison family trust, because that was the only language my father ever understood: power, paperwork, possession. He had been rewriting history for years, erasing my name from everything that bore hers. She used to whisper, "And when you were born, I saw my whole world in your eyes." But the world she lived in didn't let her keep it. I was her only child, but in the legal records, in the family foundation documents, in the estate planning files that his firm crafted so carefully, I didn't exist. Because the truth was too inconvenient. My father is Charles Gregory Harrison, owner of Harrison Estates, one of the largest property groups in Georgia. He built an empire on real estate and charm, smiles in public, control in private. And my crime, I questioned him. At age 17, I asked why Mom stopped signing papers, why she looked tired in photos, why she always wore sleeves in summer. He called me dramatic. At 19, I found the first set of documents, power of attorney, signed under pressure, countersigned by a family physician I'd never met. He told me to forget it, that I'd misunderstood. By 21, I didn't believe in misunderstandings anymore. And the day I found the amended will, the one that removed my name entirely, was the day I left home. No screaming, no letters, just a photograph of me and my mother, and a vow I would return with proof. And now, here I was, standing in the same church that once held my christening, while the man who raised me told an entire room she didn't deserve anything. He meant it, but not for the reason they thought. Because if I had stayed quiet, if I had let them close the casket on her and everything she tried to fight for, he would have gotten away with it. He almost did. But what he didn't know, what no one in that polished whispering room knew, was that I had spent the last 4 years working in legal probate. Quietly, furiously, relentlessly, I took night classes in estate litigation, worked at a law firm in Atlanta under a different last name, and every weekend I traveled back to Savannah to dig, to collect, to build a case, because I knew what he did, how he silenced her, how he replaced her medical decisions with forged consent, how he funneled money from her family trust into a shell corporation under Blake's name. And I had the receipts. I didn't cry at her funeral, not because I didn't grieve, but because I had something bigger than tears. I had evidence, and more than that, I had a key. Not metaphorical, literal, a key to a safety deposit box, one my mother opened when I was just 16, in secret, after she said, "If anything ever happens to me, Nat, go here. Promise me." I did, but I waited, because you don't use a sword like that unless the war has begun. And now, the war had begun. When the service ended and the guests filed into the reception room like ghosts in black lace, I walked the opposite direction. To her bank, to the box, to the truth. Inside, I found 3 things. One, her original will signed, witnessed, notarized, with my name on it, clear as day. Two, a handwritten journal entry dated a week before her medical conservatorship was filed. I'm scared. He says I'm confused, that the doctors will back him if I don't stop asking questions. But Natalie believes me. She always does. And three, a USB drive, labeled in her handwriting for Natalie. When you're ready. When I opened it that night, alone in a motel room outside Savannah, I watched a video dated 2 months before her death. In it, she spoke softly. No makeup, dim light behind her. She said, "If you're seeing this, I'm probably not here anymore. And that's okay, sweetheart, because now it's your turn to speak." She paused. "I never wanted you to fight for money. I wanted you to fight for your name. That was it, but it was enough. Enough to light the fire, enough to turn silence into strategy." I didn't sleep that night. I opened every file I had, every scanned document, every notarized signature, every transfer paper from the Harrison estate, and I started a timeline. Because if they thought the funeral was the end of my story, they were wrong. It was just my entrance. I didn't sleep the night after the funeral. Not because I was grieving. Grief was a privilege they stripped from me long ago. It was rage, but not the kind that shouts or throws things or begs for answers. No, it was the quiet kind. The kind that sits in your lungs like smoke. The kind that sharpens your focus like glass through silk. That night, I sat at a gas station outside Savannah, lights humming overhead, a bitter coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. Inside were documents, not just any documents. The kind that make men like my father sweat in air-conditioned boardrooms. You see, my mother wasn't just a soft-hearted Southern woman who served lemonade and read novels under the sun. She was smart, and in her final years, she was afraid. Of him, but she didn't show it. Not to the neighbors, not to the lawyers he kept close. Only to me. And I listened. When I was 24, 2 years after he forced me out, she mailed me a package. No return address, no note, just a flash drive. And when I opened it, I swear my hands trembled for the first time since I'd left. Because there it was, a scanned copy of a revised will. Signed, dated, notarized, 1 year before her death. It left everything to me. Not just the house, the land, the savings, everything. And she knew exactly what that meant. Because tucked in beside the scan was a recording. I'll never forget it. Her voice soft but steady. "Natalie, if you're hearing this, it means he's already rewritten what I signed. It means he's already buried the truth. But baby, you are the truth. And one day, when the timing is right, bring it all home." I played that recording 27 times before sunrise. And by the 27th, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just show up in court with a file and a face full of fury. Men like my father, they thrived on image. They wrapped corruption in Southern charm and handshakes at charity galas. No, I needed to be strategic, precise. So I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Her name was Marlene James. She'd once been my professor in estate litigation at Georgia State. She was also the only person who saw past my last name. I emailed her that morning. Subject line, "Need an hour of your truth." She called me in 10 minutes flat. When I told her what happened, what I had, what I planned to do, she didn't hesitate. "I'll represent you," she said, "but we don't go to war until we've gathered every arrow in the quiver." That's how it began. For the next 4 weeks, I studied harder than I had in law school. Every signature, every trust, every hidden clause he'd used to steal power away from my mother, we pulled them all and buried inside the Carter Estate Archive. We found what we needed. The original will, signed by both parents, before he had her declared mentally compromised. The psychiatric report written by a doctor who'd been investigated 3 years earlier for falsified evaluations. It was rotten, all of it. But Marlene warned me, it's not just about proving what he did, it's about when you strike. And strike we would, because the estate valued at over $12 million was in probate, and he thought he had it sealed. He didn't know I had the flash drive, didn't know I had my mother's voice, didn't know I had legal standing as the only biological child not listed on the forged will. Lucas, my brother, was the sole heir, but only because my name had been wiped. He got the house, the trust, the land deeds. And you know what he did? He threw a reclamation party. That's what he called it. Invited friends, popped champagne, took photos of himself in Mom's garden like he'd planted every flower. I saw it all, and I didn't flinch. Because revenge isn't served best when it's hot. It's served when they think they've already won. On week 6, Marlene filed the first motion. A formal contest of will. Within hours, my father's attorney called her. "Is this a mistake, Ms. Harrison is not a beneficiary." Marlene smiled cold and clean. "She's the only one." The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone. Not Lucas, not his fiancé, who now posted about how grateful she was to be part of the Carter legacy. I showed up to court in a black dress, hair tied, no jewelry, just Mom's wedding band on a chain under my blouse. My father was already seated when I arrived. He looked older, more tired, but not remorseful, just calculating. He didn't recognize the woman walking in with Marlene, but the moment I sat across from him, something shifted. And when the judge asked for opening statements, Marlene stood like a queen sharpening a blade. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that the most recent will in probate was the result of undue influence, medical fraud, and a deliberate act of inheritance obstruction. We have in our possession a previous valid will, supported by notarized documentation and an audio testament recorded by the decedent." My father's face, it didn't fall. It froze. Because in that moment he realized he hadn't erased me. He'd prepared for a ghost, but I wasn't dead. I was very much alive. And I came back holding the one thing he never thought I'd keep: truth. And it was about to unravel everything. The first time I walked into a law office as a client, I felt like I was trespassing. Everything smelled like polished wood and silent power. Secretaries in charcoal suits glanced up without smiling. I kept my hands folded, hiding the calluses from my third job. The receptionist asked who I was meeting. I looked her in the eye and said, "My name is Natalie Morgan. I'm here to prove my father forged the will that erased me." That was the beginning. I didn't have money. I didn't have clout. But I had documents, photocopies my mother had hidden in cookbooks, backups she mailed to me in pieces, always unsigned, always safe. I had voice memos, letters, bank transfers that didn't match estate records. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough to scare someone smart. The lawyer I saw that day was named Helena Bryce, a probate litigation specialist. She read through the folder in silence, her brow tight with calculation. "Do you know what you're doing, Natalie?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I know what he did." She looked at me for a long time before nodding. "Then let's begin." From that day forward, I wasn't just the daughter he discarded, I became the legal storm he didn't see coming. Every night after work, I reviewed case law, I traced old signatures, I compared estate filings and county records. Helena called me relentless. I called it self-preservation. Meanwhile, my father paraded around like grief was a tailored suit. Local news aired a tribute, the Morgan legacy, the benevolent patriarch, the estate he built from scratch. No one mentioned the daughter not listed in the obituary. But behind the curtain, the cracks had begun to show. The first was a letter from the county clerk's office. Unusual activity had been flagged on the estate transfer. The clerk who filed the paperwork was under review for accepting unverified documents. The second was a silent partner from my father's business, Ms. Callahan, who reached out to me after a mutual acquaintance whispered that the disowned daughter was stirring things up. "He forged it, didn't he?" she said over the phone, voice brittle with regret. "I thought so. He had your mother declared incompetent the same week she tried to change the will." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just added her name to the witness list. It wasn't just about the will anymore. It was about the pattern, the erasure, the system of quiet threats and paper-thin respectability he'd weaponized for years. Then I found it buried in a scanned PDF from 8 years ago, a version of the will my mother had signed, naming me as secondary executor. It wasn't notarized, but her signature was real, her handwriting unmistakable. It proved intent, motive, suppression. Helena smiled when I brought it in. "Now," she said, "we don't just argue fraud, we argue legacy theft." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I asked, "What's the next step?" "We serve notice," she replied. "Then we get ready to fight." A week later, my father received the envelope. Certified, official, unmistakable. His lawyer responded in less than 48 hours. "My client denies all claims. Ms. Morgan has no legal standing." Helena grinned. "Oh, we'll see about that." She filed the suit in the same county courthouse where he once donated stained glass windows for the lobby. The symbolism was poetic. I almost laughed when we passed beneath them. I didn't attend the first hearing. It was procedural, but I read the transcript like scripture. My father's team argued I was unstable, that I'd been estranged for years, that I was mentally fragile and had a history of erratic behavior. They brought up my jobs, my apartment, the fact that I'd changed my last name during college. They tried to paint me as a ghost, but ghosts don't leave paper trails. Helena submitted the files we'd collected, the old will, the sealed bank statements. The therapist's letter confirming my mental health records were falsified. Each piece chipped away at the myth. And then came the wild card. My mother's sister, Aunt Jo, reached out. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since the fallout, but she sent me a message. I kept something. I think it's time you saw it. We met in a quiet cafe. She looked older, tired, but her eyes still had that fierce light. She slid a box across the table. Inside my mother's diary, years of entries, dates, notes, and one passage that broke me. Charles said he'd erase her, that no one would believe a daughter who waits tables. But I know Natalie. She's fire. Quiet fire. She won't burn the house down. She'll light the truth. I sat in that cafe long after Joe left, reading until the pages blurred. My mother hadn't just hoped I'd come back. She knew, and that gave me the last thing I needed, not evidence, conviction. That night, I walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no shield. I let it soak through my coat like absolution. He could try to erase me on paper, but the ink in my blood was permanent. Now, the court date was set. 2 weeks. I'd face him, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman holding the blueprint to dismantle his legacy. And I wasn't alone anymore. Not legally, not emotionally, not even spiritually. I had my mother's words, my own name, my truth. Let him come with lawyers and legacy. I had fire. And this time like it was loud. Courtrooms don't look like justice. They look like linoleum floors and water-stained ceilings. They smell like printer toner and old coffee. But that morning, when I stepped into the courthouse, it felt like sacred ground. Not because it promised fairness, but because I was finally ready to speak where silence once swallowed me whole. The trial had been expedited. Something about urgency for the estate. Expedited probate exceptions. My father's lawyers pushed for it. I let them. Speed was on my side. Helena, my attorney, gave me one last look before we entered. You ready, Natalie? I adjusted the lapel of my black blazer, more than ever. The room wasn't full, but the tension was heavy. My father sat across the aisle. Clean shave, custom suit, cold eyes. His legal team surrounded him like a moat of polished shoes and posturing. He didn't look at me, but I saw his fingers twitch when I took my seat. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Dolores McHenry, opened proceedings. Case number 68341B, Morgan versus Morgan, disputed will and allegations of probate fraud. Just hearing it aloud made my chest tighten, but I didn't break. Helena stood first, calm, direct, deadly. Your Honor, this case isn't about entitlement. It's about erasure. My client, Natalie Morgan, has been systematically excluded from her legal inheritance through forgery, coercion, and deception. She laid out the evidence like chess moves. Timeline, motive, discrepancies, the old will, the unsigned but authenticated draft, the digital records from the filing clerk, my mother's diary, and then the smoking gun, our handwriting expert, who testified that the signature on the revised will had been traced. Not just forged, traced. I watched the jury scribble notes. Then came my father's defense. She left the family. They said she was unstable. She didn't want the estate. They tried to paint me as a wayward child chasing ghosts. They even introduced a former teacher to claim I'd been emotionally erratic in high school. The judge raised an eyebrow. This is a will contest. Counselor, not a personality critique. They backed off. When it was my turn to testify, the room felt like a breath held too long. I took the stand, raised my hand, swore the oath. Helena asked the first question. Why are you here, Natalie? I looked at the jury, then at my father. I'm here because my mother never got to be heard, and I won't let that happen again. I told them everything. The night I saw him grab her wrist, The day he cut off my access to school funds. The phone call where he said I was no longer his daughter. I told them about the couch I slept on, the jobs, the law books, the letters my mother hid in library books. She was scared. I said, voice steady, not just of him, of being forgotten. And now they've tried to forget me too. Helena showed the jury the letter my mother wrote, addressed to me, tucked inside a book on family law. You were never loud, Natalie, it said. But your silence always held truth like a sword. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. My father didn't speak that day. His lawyer spoke for him, but I saw his shoulders inch closer to his ears with every revelation. We rested our case. The defense tried to stall, asked for a recess, claimed emotional manipulation. Judge McHenry was having none of it. You forged a legal document, Mr. Morgan, she said. Let's not act surprised that truth carries consequences. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I waited in the hallway, staring at the vending machine like it held answers. Helena sat beside me, quiet. When the bailiff called us back in, my legs felt hollow. The foreman stood, knees fixed forward. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Natalie Morgan. Every word after that felt like a release valve. The will was deemed invalid. Probate reopened. Restitution ordered. And in the final note, the judge ruled this court acknowledges Natalie Morgan as a rightful heir to the Morgan estate. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of him. But I turned, looked my father in the eyes. He didn't look back. He stood, walked out, and for the first time, he looked small. Afterward, reporters wanted quotes. I gave none. Let the records speak. Let the silence say everything. But Helena smiled. You didn't just win. Natalie, you rewrote the story. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps for a long time. The sky was overcast, clean, like the day had been scrubbed of lies. I reached into my coat, pulled out the last letter my mother ever wrote me. Keep your fire, it said, but don't forget fire warms as well as it burns. Build something with it. So I did. Not a mansion, not a monument, but a trust, the Grace Fund. Named after her, seated with my inheritance, it provides legal aid to women caught in conservatorship traps. Women silenced by forged papers and fake diagnoses. Women like my mother, and daughters like me. Some nights I still hear his voice. We don't have a daughter, but now, when I hear it, I smile, because it's no longer true. The world knows my name. And in the court records of Los Angeles County, it's printed in bold. Natalie Morgan heir. Not erased. Restored. Not broken. Risen. And the story he tried to end, it's only just begun. After the courtroom victory, I thought I would feel something close to peace. But peace doesn't arrive wrapped in gavel strikes or printed verdicts. It doesn't come with applause or a clean cut through the past. It comes slowly like a sunrise behind thick fog. You don't notice it right away. You just realize one day that you're not flinching anymore. I moved back into the estate on a Thursday. Not because I wanted to reclaim its grandeur, but because the ghosts inside had waited long enough. The locks were changed. The rooms were cold. Dust coated the piano keys like silence that had grown old with time. But I didn't flinch. I walked the halls with purpose, the soles of my boots echoing on marble that once ignored my existence. I wasn't here to remember. I was here to restore. The first thing I did was remove the portraits. The ones where he stood tall, smiling beside my brother and his mother. The ones where my face was always missing. I replaced them with something else, photos of my mother, soft and powerful. Her handwritten letters, framed in silver, her violin, restored and placed beneath the staircase where she used to hum. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making the space honest. It was about giving voice to a story that had only ever been told by the victors by men who bought silence with power and rewrote pain into propriety. Not in this house. Not anymore. By the second week, I'd converted the West Wing into a legal aid annex, staffed with women I'd trained, all survivors of some kind. Not just of abuse, but of being unseen. Together, we built a framework for something greater. The Morgan estate became more than an address. It became a movement. Meanwhile, my father vanished. No press appearances, no statements, no rebuttals. But I knew where he was. He'd retreated to the summer home in Oregon. The one my mother designed. the one she'd wanted to turn into a wellness center for women. He'd scoffed at the idea back then. Now he was hiding inside it. Funny how the places they mock become their only refuge when the walls cave in. I didn't contact him. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because the silence between us had finally begun to speak. He no longer held the pen. I did. And the first chapter I wrote under my full name, Natalie Morgan, was for the State Archives. It was a formal petition to establish the Margaret Morgan Foundation, backed by the estate's full endowment, with a mandate to protect daughters like me, and like the ones my father erased. The board approved it unanimously. The press called it a poetic reversal. But I didn't care for poetry anymore. I cared for permanence. The same week, I was invited to speak at Stanford Law, my alma mater, though I'd graduated under a different name. I stood on that stage in front of 200 students, all hungry to change the world with doctrines and dreams. And I told them the truth, that justice is not loud. It doesn't always roar or riot. Sometimes justice is a girl on a couch, reading law books by candlelight because her father closed the door. Sometimes justice is patience wrapped in silence. And when it speaks, it doesn't ask for permission. It declares itself. After the speech, a young woman approached me. Her hands trembled as she spoke. My dad erased my name from his will when I came out. I thought I was alone. I held her hand. You're not. That's the legacy now. Not marble statues or donation plaques, but restoration, redemption, resilience. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Oregon. No return address, just my name, handwritten. I knew the script. I opened it on the same bench where my mother once sat during summer evenings. Inside was a single page. No apology. Just a question. Was it worth it? I didn't answer, because the answer isn't a sentence. It's the way the staff greet women with warmth when they enter the legal annex. It's the violin music that plays softly in the library. It's the line outside our doors every Monday morning, women waiting not for handouts, but for dignity. Was it worth it? Yes. 1,000 times yes. But he didn't deserve that answer, because he wasn't asking for clarity. He was asking for absolution, and that's something he'll never get from me. In August, the foundation funded its 100th legal intervention. We threw a quiet celebration. No press, just stories. One woman stood up and shared how her father had locked her out of her education. I used to think silence kept me safe, she said. But now I know. Silence keeps them safe. I looked around that room at women with names that had almost disappeared. And I realized I'd been wrong. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. One where daughters don't vanish. One where legacy isn't forged, it's earned. And one where the most dangerous thing a man can do is underestimate the girl he tried to erase. So when people ask me now, how did you do it? How did you take everything back? I say nothing for a moment. Then I smile. And answer, I didn't take it back. I claimed what never should have been stolen. I walk the estate grounds every Sunday morning now. The garden blooms again. Not because I planted flowers, but because the rot is gone, and in its place, truth. You can inherit land. You can inherit wealth. But the most powerful inheritance is voice. And I have mine. Finally, forever.